Hey everyone, this is chapter 1 of James Burnham's The Managerial Revolution. What is happening in the world? This is from 1941. I guess I should read the chapters that constitute the book. Chapter 1, The Problem. Chapter 2, The World We Lived In. Chapter 3, The Theory of the Permanence of Capitalism. Chapter 4, The Theory of the Proletarian Socialist Revolution. Chapter 5, The Struggle for Power. Chapter 6, The Theory of the Managerial Revolution. Chapter 7, Who are the Managers? Chapter 8, The Managers Move Towards Social Dominance. Chapter 9, The Economy of Managerial Society. Chapter 10, The Managers Shift the Locus of Sovereignty. Chapter 11, Totalitarianism in Managerial Society. Chapter 12, The World Policy of the Managers. Chapter 13, The Managerial Ideologies. Chapter 14, The Russian Way. Chapter 15, The German Way. Chapter 16, The Future of the United States. Chapter 17, Objections. So here we go. Chapter 1, The Problem. During the course of the Second World War, which began on September 11, 1939, growing numbers of persons came to the conclusion that this war could not be adequately understood in the usual military and diplomatic terms. Of course, each participant in every big war is careful to explain that it fights not for any vulgar purpose of mere conquest, but for liberty, justice, God, and the future of mankind. The Second World War is no exception to this general rule, which seems to express a deep need of men's moral nature when confronted with the task of mutual slaughter. Nevertheless, with all allowances for the general rule, there still remains, on the part of trained and intelligent as well as casual observers, the conviction that this war is not an ordinary war. The difference has been stated by some in calling the war a, quote, revolution, more particularly a, quote, social revolution. For example, the well-known writer Quincy Howe, in his radio commentaries, insisted time after time on such an interpretation. Germany, Quincy Howe kept repeating, is not merely sending a remarkably organized military machine across its borders. Germany's military machine is the carrier of a social revolution which is transforming the social system on the European continent. Wikipedia says Quincy Howe lived from 1900 to 1977 and was an American journalist best known for his CBS radio broadcast during World War II. Back to the text. The same point was made in numerous dispatches from Otto Tolicius after his expulsion from Germany, where Otto Tolicius had been stationed for many years as chief correspondent of the New York Times. Wikipedia says Otto Tolicius lived from 1890 to 1967 and was a Prussian-Lithuanian-born journalist of the New York Times and winner of the 1990 Pulitzer Prize for correspondence for his writing and reporting from Berlin before and during World War II. Otto Tolicius started his journalistic career in the Cleveland Press and went on to work as a foreign correspondent in Berlin and London for Universal News Service and International News Service. In 1940, as a foreign correspondent for the New York Times, Tolicius was expelled from Germany by the Nazi authorities. In 1941, Tolicius was appointed as the chief foreign correspondent for both the New York Times and the Times in Tokyo. Following the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, Tolicius was arrested by Japanese authorities. After enduring 6 months of torture and confinement, Tolicius was permitted to be evacuated from Japan along with the rest of the U.S. press corps. In 1942, Tolicius became a member of the New York Times editorial board, where he worked until his retirement in 1964. Back to the text. I mention these two men not because their opinion was exceptional, but rather because they conspicuously and consistently upheld a view which has come to be shared by so many others. However, when we examine what such observers have said and written, we discover that, though they have been firm in their insistence that the Second World War is a social revolution, they have been by no means clear in describing what kind of revolution it is, what it consists of, where it is leading, what type of society will emerge from it. We must be careful not to permit historical judgment to be distorted by the staggering emotional impact of the war itself. If a major social revolution is now in fact occurring, the war is subordinate to the revolution, not the other way around. The war in the final analysis and future wars is an episode in the revolution. We cannot understand the revolution by restricting our analysis to the war. We must understand the war as a phase in the development of the revolution. Moreover, the role of Germany in the revolution, if it is a revolution, should not be exaggerated. The modern world is interlocked by myriad technological, economic, and cultural chains. The social forces which have been dramatically operative within Germany have not stopped at the Reich's national boundaries. If they came to so startling a head in Germany, this does not mean that they have not been driving steadily beneath the surface, and not so far beneath in other nations, in all other nations for that matter. For us who live in the United States, it is the United States that is our most natural first interest. The outworn fallacies of the belief in the military isolation of the United States from the rest of the world are not 1/10 so grave as the fallacies of the belief in our social isolation. New section. It is by no means obvious what we mean when we speak of a, quote, social revolution, especially when we try to distinguish a social revolution from a merely, quote, military or, quote, political revolution. Several conflicting definitions have been attempted, as a rule accompanying special and conflicting theories of history, of which the definitions are a part. It seems, however, possible to describe the chief constituents of what can intelligibly be meant by a, quote, social revolution without committing ourselves in advance to any special theory. These chief constituents seem to be three. 1. There takes place a drastic change in the most important social, economic, and political institutions. The system of property relations, the forms under which economic production is carried on, the legal structure, the type of political organization and regime, are all so sharply altered that we feel compelled to call them different in kind, not merely modified in degree. Medieval feudal property relations, modes of economic production, law, political organization are all replaced by modern bourgeois or capitalist property relations, modes of production, law, and political organization. During the course of the revolution, it often happens that the old institutions are quite literally smashed to pieces, with new institutions developing to perform analogous functions in the new society. 2. Along with the changes in social institutions, there go more or less parallel changes in cultural institutions and in the dominant beliefs which men hold about man's place in the world and the universe. This cultural shift is plainly seen in the transition from feudal to modern capitalist society, both in the reorganization of the form and place of such institutions as the church and the schools, and in the complete alteration of the general view of the world, of life, and of man which took place during the Renaissance. 3. Finally, we observe a change in the group of men which holds the top positions, which controls the greater part of power and privilege in society. To the social dominance of feudal lords, with their vassals and fiefs, succeeds the social dominance of industrialists and bankers, with their monetary wealth, their factories, and wage workers. In this conception, there is a certain arbitrariness. The fact is that social and cultural institutions, beliefs and relationships of social power always change, are subject to a continuous modification. It is impossible to draw an exact temporal line dividing one type of society from another. What is important is not so much the fact of change, which is always present in history, as the rate of change. In some periods, the rate of social change is far more rapid than in others. Whatever one's professed theory of history, it can hardly be denied that the rate of change of social institutions, beliefs, and relative power of various social groups was incomparably higher in, say, the 2 centuries from 1400 to 1600 than in the 6 centuries preceding 1400. That, indeed, there was a much greater total change in those 2 centuries than there had been during the 6 centuries from 800 to 1400. Where am I? I accidentally hit something. God damn it. Shit. Whatever one's professed theory of history, it can hardly be denied that the rate of change of social institutions, beliefs, and relative power of various social groups was incomparably higher in, say, the 2 centuries from 1400 to 1600, and then in the 6 centuries preceding 1400. That indeed there was a much greater total change in those 2 centuries than there had been during the 6 centuries from 800 to 1400. What we seem to mean by a social revolution is identical with such a period of maximum rate of change. We all recognize the society that prevailed before such a period as a different type from that which is consolidated after it. Historians differ widely about when the quote modern era began, but they all unite in making a sharp distinction between medieval and modern society. To say that a social revolution is occurring at the present time is, then, equivalent to saying that the present is a period characterized by a very rapid rate of social change, that it is a period of transition from one type of society, that type which has prevailed from roughly the 15th century to the early part of the 20th, to a new and different type of society. For centuries, men's activities are worked out within a given, more or less stable, framework of social and cultural institutions. Changes take place, but not to such an extent as to alter the basic framework. Occasionally, in human history, the changes take place so rapidly and are so drastic in extent that the framework itself is shattered and a new framework takes its place. New section. The problem of this book is as follows. I'm going to assume the general conception of a social revolution, which I have just briefly stated. I'm going to assume further, though not without evidence to back up this assumption, that the present is in fact a period of social revolution, of transition from one type of society to another. With the help of these assumptions, I shall present a theory, which I call, quote, the theory of the managerial revolution, which is able to explain this transition and to predict the type of society in which the transition will eventuate. To present this theory is the problem, and the only problem, of this book. I do not wish to pretend that this theory is a startling and personal invention. On the contrary, when, during the past years, I have presented it in lectures or conversations, I'm generally told, quote, why, that is just what I have been thinking lately, end quote, or, quote, that is what I was telling so-and-so only a few days ago, end quote. This reaction has seemed to me a reason not for dropping the theory as trivial or banal, but rather for bringing it as fully and explicitly as possible into the light, so that it may be examined publicly and critically, to be rejected, accepted, or suitably modified, as the evidence for and against it may demand. During the past 20 years, many elements of the theory have been included in various articles and books, to which I must acknowledge a general indebtedness without being able to name any particular one by which I have been specifically influenced. What is new in the outline is hardly more than that. Which will follow is the name given to the theory, which is not important, the number of diverse historical factors which are synthesized under it, the elimination of assumptions which have heretofore obscured its significance, and the manner of presentation. With reference to the last, another word is necessary. I am not writing a program of social reform, nor am I making any moral judgment whatever on the subject with which I am dealing. As I have stated, I am concerned exclusively with the attempt to elaborate a descriptive theory, able to explain the character of the present period of social transition, and to predict, at least in general, its outcome. I am not concerned in this book at any rate with whether the facts indicated by this theory are, quote, good, or, quote, bad, just or unjust, desirable or undesirable, but simply whether the theory is true or false on the basis of the evidence now at our disposal. This warning, I know, will not be enough to prevent many who read this book from attributing to it a program and a morality. The elimination of such considerations is extremely rare in what is written about history, society, and politics. In these fields we are perhaps understandably more anxious for salvation than for knowledge, but experience ought to teach us that genuine salvation is possible only on the foundation of knowledge. And, though this book contains no program and no morality, if the theory which it puts forward is true, or partly true, no intelligent program or social morality is possible without an understanding of the theory. It's the end of Chapter 1 of James Burnham's The Managerial Revolution. What was the chapter titled? The Problem. Thank you so much for listening.